Hello Infiniteers! Today I'm going to show you how to hook up the logic for the stealth mission in the warehouse. If you remember from the playthrough, we had a mission giver who sent the player to the warehouse to collect some scream canisters, and I had some robots running around through here in different places that were patrolling the warehouse, and they would kick you out if they caught you. So you need to avoid the robots in order to collect the canisters and complete the mission. And so that's what I'm going to show you how to implement today. This is a mission that you could add to any toy box, and I think it's a nice change of pace from just fighting enemies all of the time. This game works best in areas where you have narrow corridors or walkways like this, and little alcoves or places where you can go to get out of their way. Because if the area that the enemies are patrolling is too wide open, then this becomes much too easy to avoid them. So let me start by showing you the Creativitoys that I have placed ahead of time. And I did this before I started recording so that I could save some time. So over in the scare floor, I added a locator over here. This will be where our mission giver goes. You can see where the little blue dot's facing there. In the corridor over here, I put down a checkpoint. And it's kind of centered on those windows over there and with the door. Notice which way that red dot on the far upper left corner of it there is facing. For each of the robots, you're going to need an enemy wave generator, a radar marker, and a dynamic trigger. Okay? And I've placed a locator in each of the locations in the warehouse where the robot's going to go. So that's where the first one is. These are where the other two are. This one, a little dot faces that way. This one, it faces this way. Okay? And over here we have the same three controls: the enemy wave generator, the radar marker, and the dynamic trigger that's going to go with this robot who's patrolling that corridor. Here we have the enemy wave generator, the radar marker, and the dynamic trigger that's going to go with this robot who's going to patrol that corridor. Then I have a counter and two time delayers, and you can see I've already made some logic connections. Don't worry about that. I'm going to explain it. We have a trigger area that I've set up out here, and I've just placed this here, and notice that it's up against the wall and lined up with this terrain seam. And notice too where I placed the little stretching, resizing indicators. Then we have a collectible tracker and a replayer and another time delayer. And for our mission giver, I have a friendly wave generator, a radar marker, a dynamic trigger, and a text displayer. Alright, so those are most of the Creativitoys that you're going to need. The other Creativitoys that I have not put down yet are the path creators, and I'll do that here in a moment. But let's start with the replayer, because I think it'll be easier to put this down and do this before we put everything else in the warehouse. We're going to use this to put the canisters into the toy box. And for the canisters, we're going to use the kiln loot piece. That looks a lot like the screen canisters, so I like that. So we'll come out of the editor and step on our replayer. That gets us the menu in the lower right corner. And on my Wii U, I press B to start recording, and then I have to step off to get back into the editor. And now where you decide to place these in here is entirely up to you. I'm going to put one on top of this crate there. I'm going to put one in this back corner over here. We'll put another one up on top of this crate. put one over here. And I think that's probably enough. You don't have to go crazy with this. That gives us, what, 5 of them? I think that's sufficient. If we want, we could throw another one out here, but I don't really see the need. I don't want to make this too difficult for the player to get to these. All right, so we'll go ahead and exit out of the editor. I put 5 of them down. We'll step on our replayer once again to get that menu in the lower right. And I press B a second time here to stop recording. And you'll notice the little icon below B changed from a square to a circle. And then I'm going to press A to clear. And only press A once, or you might corrupt that replayer. All right, so there we go. Now let's do the robots. And so the first thing we're going to need to do is put down the paths. And I'm going to come over here to this locator, right off the end of the locator. I'll place it. That puts me in point collection mode. And then we're going to come down and put this, let's see, let me grab my screenshot here. Yeah, put that right there. And then I'll exit. Over here, we're going to put another one down. And notice I can't really center this on the aisle, so I'm moving the path a little more toward the center. That gets it away from that little alcove to make it easier for the player to hide there. And then our third path will go over here off the end of that locator. And we'll drop that final point there. Okay, so there are our paths. And on each of the paths, we need to set the path properties. We want to set the speed to 25. And all of the rest of these can be left the way they are. So you're just changing the speed. We're trying to put in a good walking speed for the robots. We don't want them moving too quickly. We don't want them moving too slowly. 25 is a good speed. And one more over here. All right, now I'm going to show you how to set up one of these, all right, one of these robots. The logic for the others is the exact same. All right, so I'm going to show you how to set up these 3 controls along with that path creator. You can do the same thing for these 3 and these 3. All right. So let's start off by coming over here. We're going to go to our enemy wave generator, and to save a little bit of time, I configured the wave. I'm using the blasting Zergbot. And you have to go all the way to the bottom of the enemy list to get there. But then we'll do a new locator connection. We're going to connect that up to this locator. And again, for the one over here, you're going to connect that one to this locator. For this one over here, you're going to connect that to that locator. And then we want to connect the paths. So we're going to do a new path connection. And let me go ahead and make that same connection over here because I've already hooked these up ahead of time. But I just dropped that path down, so I have not made the path connection yet. So this one's going to connect to that path. You can see it's already connected to that locator. And this one, we're going to connect up to the other path. And I've already connected it to that locator there. All right, on the path, or on the enemy wave generator properties, once you've connected it to the locator and the path, come in here and take the generation delay to 0. And under Toy Box Path, we want to change the movement style to back and forth. All right? And leave all of the rest of these set the way they are. We want them to ignore outside influences because I want them to just stay on the path and patrol. We're not going to use these as regular enemies. They're not going to attack. They're just going to go back and forth, and you just don't want to be caught by them. And you can leave this turned on too. With this turned on, they should not attack, but if for some reason they happen to, we want them to go back to the path. All right? So you'll make that same property change over here. And I need to do that because I didn't have the path connected prior, so let me do that in here. Again, the main thing you're just changing is the movement style. And I've already set the generation delay to 0 on both of these, as you can see. All right. So now with the properties set up on that, the enemy wave generator is ready to go. Now for the radar marker, you're going to do a new actor connection. You're going to connect that up to the enemy wave generator. And on the properties for this, the beacon type, we're going to change this to a blue ring. That's going to put a ring around the enemy, which will indicate his detection range. And it's another reason why it's a good idea to use this in a narrow, confined area, because I can't make that ring any bigger. You don't have any control over the size of that detection ring. But for the beacon location, that needs to be on the connected actor, and leave both of these off by default. All right. And then on the dynamic trigger, we'll do the same thing, a new actor connection. Connect that up to our enemy wave generator as our actor. And on the properties for this, target needs to be the connected actor. Trigger distance should be 3. And that's very important. Anything bigger and it doesn't really work too well. Anything smaller and that doesn't work too well either. 3 kind of matches the ring that's around this radar marker. All right, so what's going to happen is I'm going to set this trigger area up around the warehouse, and I'll do that at the end after we're done setting everything up. But this trigger area, when the player enters this as they're approaching the warehouse, this is going to generate all of the robots. I don't want to leave them in here all of the time because that takes up memory. And so I don't want anything running here. I don't want the enemy wave going. I don't want the radar marker on. I don't want the dynamic trigger on because this takes up a lot of CPU. So the first thing I want to do, let's come over to the level starter here. And on new logic connection on catalyze, we're going to come over to the dynamic trigger for our robot and turn that off. Make that same connection for the other 2 dynamic triggers, for that robot and for that robot. All right. And then once you've done that, come over here and push the button, which we hooked up last time. That invokes the level starter, which will turn off those radar markers. Okay. On the trigger area, we're going to do a new logic connection when entered by player any. So when any player enters the warehouse, we want to come over to each of the enemy wave generators and generate the wave. Make that same connection for the other 2 enemy wave generators. And I've already done that for mine. On the trigger area, new logic connection when entered by player any. We want to come over and turn on the radar marker. Make that same connection for the other 2 radar markers over here for the other 2 robots. And I've already done that ahead of time for mine. A new logic connection on the trigger area when entered by player any. Turn on the dynamic trigger. And make that same connection for the other two dynamic triggers over here for the other two robots. And again, I've already done that with mine. All right. So that's everything that the trigger area here needs to do. Now, well, not quite everything it needs to do. The other thing is the counter. So we want to leave these robots in here going until the last player leaves this trigger area. All right, and so the counter is going to keep track of that. So on the counter, we're going to go into the properties, and we're just going to turn off visible display. We'll leave everything else set the way it is. All right. So what you're going to do here then is on the counter, or on the trigger area, a new logic connection. When exited by player any, we want to come over here and decrement the counter by 1. And on the trigger area, a new logic connection when entered by player any, we want to increment this counter. We'll increment it by 1. Okay? All right, that's everything that the trigger area needs to do. Okay, on the counter, when the last player leaves that trigger area, on the counter we'll do a new logic connection. When 0 is reached, we want to go and defeat the wave. This will take the robot out of the toy box and reclaim the memory. So make that connection, the same connection from the counter to the other two enemy wave generators for the robots. On the counter, a new logic connection when 0 is reached. We want to turn off the radar marker. And you're going to make that same connection for the other two radar markers for the other two robots. On the counter, a new logic connection when 0 is reached. We'll turn off the dynamic trigger, and you'll make that same connection for the other two robots, for the other two dynamic triggers. Okay, and you can see I've already hooked that up to those 6 toys, those 3, and those 3. And I did that ahead of time just to save time. There's no need to watch me set all of these up and all of these up. If you see me do it once, you can do it yourself for the other two. Okay, and that's everything. Let's see, is that everything for the counter? Not quite. Nope, that is everything for the counter. All right. Now, when the player enters that range around the robot, we want to kick them out of the warehouse. And for that, we're going to use our checkpoint here. So on the checkpoint properties, we're going to leave all of these set the way they are. You want to make sure you turn on the hidden flag. I'm going to wait and do that at the end, just so it makes it a little easier to find this toy when I'm in the editor. But all the rest of those properties you can leave set just like they are. Okay? And so what we want to do then is on the dynamic trigger for the robot, a new logic connection when entered by player any. First thing I want to do is play a sound effect to let the player know they've been caught. So we're going to come over here to our sound effect generator that we put down last time. And under the general category, we're going to have it do the alarm. And now because of the way the checkpoint works, we're going to need to make 2 logic connections here, one for each player. So on the dynamic trigger a new logic connection when entered by player 1. We'll come over to our checkpoint, and we're going to teleport the player 1. And on the dynamic trigger for the robot, a new logic connection when entered by player 2. We'll teleport player 2 over to the checkpoint. There we go. So you'll make those same 3 connections to the sound effect generator and 2 to the checkpoint from the dynamic triggers of the other 2 robots as well. And I've already made those connections ahead of time. And actually, hold on a moment. For the checkpoints, delete those connections. Both of them. We don't go directly to there. Sorry. I want to give a second for the player to hear that alarm before we teleport them. That's why I have these 2 time delayers out here. I apologize for that. We're going to use this one for player 1, this one for player 2. So our dynamic trigger actually has to hook up to those, not to the checkpoint directly. So on the dynamic trigger, new logic connection when entered by player 1, we connect that to our first time delayer over here and start that delay. And again, it would be a little disconcerting if you play the alarm and at the same moment the alarm starts playing, the player is teleported. I want to give them a second to hear the alarm so they know what's going on. Alright, so the connection when entered by player 2 comes over to this time delayer. And now on this first time delayer, we'll do a new logic connection when the delay is completed. Now we'll go over to the checkpoint and teleport player 1. And on the other time delayer, new logic connection when the delay is completed on that one, we'll go to our checkpoint and teleport player 2. Okay, so each of the dynamic triggers here needs to connect to the sound effect generator and connect when entered by player 1 to this time delayer, when entered by player 2 to that one. Okay, and I've already connected these up accordingly. Alright, so that is everything now with the robots. And this is really the most complicated part of it. It's not that complicated even. It's just a matter of connecting them to the path with the right properties and setting up these 3 controls and the counter and these time delayers with the checkpoint. So now that we've done that, we're going to grab the little resize handle on this trigger area, and we are going to stretch this all the way over to the opposite wall, to the upper corner, like that. Okay? So this trigger area fills the entire warehouse and part of the corridor out here. And you can kind of see, if I can get in here, where that trigger area lines up. Maybe. Well, anyway, basically you're using the default size of the trigger area when you drop it down. And then you're just stretching that one to fill, and that puts it in the right place. If this isn't lined up properly, you can use that terrain seam, that block seam there as a reference. But if it isn't lined up precisely with that, that's okay. Alright, and there are the robots. So now we could test this out, perhaps, before we connect up the rest of our mission. So let me come into the scare floor. How are we doing on time here, by the way? This is turning out to be a longer video than I was expecting. But we come into our warehouse. We've entered that trigger area, so now the robots are in here. And they're patrolling. And if we enter the radius around them... Oh, and he should be patrolling. He's not. That's interesting. That one is, and that one is. And if we enter that radius, then it throws us out here. It's interesting that that one's not moving. All right, so if we leave, that should take the robots out. And if we exit, go into the editor, you can see the robots aren't there any longer. Oops, sorry. This is why we didn't stretch the trigger area over until the end, because your cursor just bounces all over the place here. But it looks like that's set up. That should have worked. Let me try that one more time. The rest of the logic for this is going to go pretty quick. This was the bulk of it. So, all right, so we enter, we come in, and for some reason, he's just not patrolling. I'll have to look at that a little bit later, but let's go ahead and hook up the rest of the logic for this. Oh, and they're still patrolling. Because I didn't leave the trigger area the right way. All right. But now they're, well, they're still not. Oh, because I, our counter, the count is messed up on the counter now. Because I exited the trigger area by coming out of there. Yeah, so. All right. Hate when that happens. Lesson learned, though. Never leave the trigger area by going into the editor. Before you go into the editor, leave that trigger area. All right? Okay. Well, let's set up our mission giver next. So we're going to use this friendly wave generator. We're going to connect that up to our locator over here. That'll be our spawn location. And I've already configured the wave on this one to save a little time. We're using Don Carlton. Under the properties, take the generation delay to 0. That's all you have to do there. For the radar marker, once again, we'll connect that to our friendly wave generator as our actor. And on the properties for this, set the beacon type to a yellow exclamation point, beacon location to the connected actor, and turn the active flag on. On the dynamic trigger, we're going to do a new actor connection. Connect that up to the friendly wave generator. Go into the properties, and I hate the way it spins this camera around. That's so annoying. And we're going to set the trigger distance to, let's see, what did I set this to? 4. Yeah, it's like, stop helping me. Leave it where I put it. On the text displayer, set the properties with the text duration to 4, text style to banner. All right, and then on the level starter, we do a new logic connection on catalyze. Come over to our friendly wave generator and generate the wave. That puts our mission giver into the toy box right when we enter the toy box. All right, so all of these are set up now. So on the dynamic trigger, We'll do a new logic connection when entered by player any. So when the player approaches the mission giver, first thing we'll do is turn off the radar marker. And on the radar marker, a new logic connection, when that is deactivated, we'll turn around and turn off the dynamic trigger for our mission giver. So we only want to do this once. On the dynamic trigger for the mission giver, a new logic connection when entered by player any. We're going to have them display some text. We'll go all the way down to the bottom to the missions category, and he's going to say, "Can I ask you a favor?" And then on the dynamic trigger for the mission giver, a new logic connection when entered by player any. We'll come over here and do a playback on our replayer. That will put the screen canisters into the warehouse. We don't want to do that ahead of time because that takes up memory. So we only want those in here while the mission is active. All right, and that is everything for our mission giver. Now the rest of the mission is really controlled by the collectible tracker. And so on the properties for that, we're going to set the collectible type to be the kiln loot piece. And we'll show them on the radar. And we'll do a new logic connection when the final collectible is collected. We're going to come over to our action enforcer. And we will have all of the players celebrate. And on the collectible tracker, a new logic connection when the final collectible is collected. Come over to our sound effect generator, and I'll play my standard end of mission sound, which is under the musical category. It's the fanfare. And then the other thing we want to do is take the collectibles back out, because even though we've picked them up, they're still in the toy box. We're going to use this time delayer for that. We'll just leave that set to the default of 1 second. So on the collectible tracker, a new logic connection when the final collectible is collected. We'll kick off the time delayer to start the delay. And on the time delayer, a new logic connection when the delay is completed. We'll clear the replayer. And it's important to use the time delayer here, because if we've picked up the last collectible and we've invoked this collectible tracker has been invoked because of that, if you then take that collectible out immediately while this is still doing its stuff, some weird things can sometimes happen. So it's better to throw the time delayer in here, let the collectible tracker finish what it's doing, and then a second later take the collectibles out. That just prevents any potential problems. All right, and I think that's everything. On these two time delayers over here, by the way, we're using just the default 1 second delay. And that's sufficient on those. All right, and I think that is everything for the mission here. And before I sign off, let me go offline for a moment and check out that other robot that was kind of stuck over there and see if I can figure out what was going on. Okay, I have exited the toy box and reloaded it. And now he's working. So, there you go. Why he got stuck before, I don't know, but if that happens, just save your toy box and exit it and reload it, and you're good to go. Now, the other thing I noticed when I got in here, and again, you'll notice I left that trigger area before I went into the editor here. The other thing I noticed when I had exited the toy box and came back in was that I started at this checkpoint. And so on the properties for this, let's just make sure this is set available to none. Or, yeah, there we go, none. It's at the top of the list. Just so it doesn't use this as a checkpoint. And the other thing you can do to make sure that happens is come over to your level starter like I had mentioned last time. I should have done this. But a new logic connection on Catalyze. We'll come over and just turn this off. That'll make sure we don't use it as a regular checkpoint, because again, we're just using it to teleport the player when they're caught. And since I started over there, that reminded me that I need to move my start pad. So let me take care of that. And you can see where this needs to go. But we're going to center it on this door. And we're going to place it right there. Okay? And then the player will start inside the factory instead of out there on the ground. But that's how the logic works for the stealth game. It's pretty straightforward, and hopefully I explained it well enough for you to follow. Next time I'll show you how to set up the logic for the mission to rescue the kids in the door storage area. And that will be the last episode in this series that I have planned. It will air this Friday. And that means that there will not be an episode of Toy Box Tutorials this week because I want to finish up my Monsters, Inc. series by Halloween. Thank you for watching. Before you go, let me remind you that I have logic diagrams on my blog for this episode. The link is in the video description. Take care, and I'll be back on Friday with the final episode in this series. See you then.